governments were unable to regulate the food industry. And they're not going to be able to. It's just not going to happen. Fortunately, with people like you,
and
me, that are out there teaching the public and the people who are ready to understand that we can do these radical things known as preparing our own food, meditating, walking, moving, that we can create health by our own choices. So yes, we
that's
could do
amazing. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eat Real to Heal podcast. I am Nicolette Richer, and I am your host. And before we dive into this incredible show that we recorded a few weeks back with Dr. Terry Wahls, and I know a lot of you remember this incredible medical doctor who reversed her multiple sclerosis using food as medicine. So everything we teach here is about food as medicine, and we have a second incredible show with Dr. Terry Wahls where she is going to teach you everything that you need to do to reverse your chronic diseases, including multiple sclerosis, which is exactly what she did. But before we dive into that podcast, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge what is happening on the planet. Because when we recorded this show a few weeks ago, no one, Dr. Terry Wahls, not myself, anybody could have anticipated what was going to hit us so readily, really starting in the beginning of February for most people in North America who might be listening to this now. But COVID-19 really wasn't on too many people's radars, and everything was business as usual. But things have changed drastically, and I just want to give you an update on where we are at, and also just to reach out and say that we are feeling so deeply for all of the entrepreneurs that have had to shut down their business, which includes ourselves. We had to shut down 5 of our restaurants and all of our corporate operations for our education, just because without any revenue coming in, there's no way we could keep our staff on. And it was the hardest thing for us to do was to really have to temporarily lay off all of our employees, which we don't even know what temporary means in this day and age because everything is so unknown. But I've never felt something so deeply sad for that day when we had to tell everybody that it was their last day. And that was hard, but I know that that's happening across the globe for everybody. So I just want to reach out to all the entrepreneurs because I know that many of you will not open your businesses again because and just like us, we weren't, ready to have to fund our business for 3 months, maybe 6 months, and through this pandemic. And so it is going to be a great loss for so many people, but it's also going to be a huge awakening as well as many people pivot their ideas, their businesses, and enter into a whole new world. I believe this is an amazing time for creativity, for self-reflection, for really tapping into what your values are. And then as all of this lifts, that you step deeply into those places where you can honor those values that you've come to recognize and maybe which you have lost and forgotten during the rat race that we call human society. So this time is a pause for reflection. It's a time for learning. It's a time for introspection. It's a time for being of service. So that's the second thing I wanted to say is thank you to all of those individuals, the individuals in our lives, the individuals that I'm reading about online that are going above and beyond and actually being of service to other organizations, to other individuals. We have an Airbnb and a wellness center that we rent out when we don't have retreats going on. And one of the things that Airbnb has done is they're putting $25 million plus an additional $10 million back into the pockets of people who have needed to rent their home. as part of just trying to have a mortgage and trying to own a little bit of real estate and trying to have a secure spot for their families. And so they're putting money back into people's pockets. But even beyond that, like truly the most magnificent work that I see happening is that, these Airbnb hosts are actually opening up their homes for free to frontline workers. And that is a beautiful thing. We see the food banks, we see a lot of the nonprofits that are having volunteers come to them and offer their services during a time when you could be binge eating, binge watching Netflix and all the other, streaming sites. But instead, these people have gotten up off their couch. They've gotten out from behind their fear and their anxiety and their panic. And to try and be of service to other organizations to help them succeed and get through this time. So I'm loving seeing that happen. And I'm just curious if you are one of those people who have decided to get out from under that haze of doubt and fear and panic and be of service to somebody else. And if you've lost your job, but you have decided to volunteer during this time, I want to hear your stories, because we need to share those stories, because truly that's when literally the village comes together. We are a collective global village with smaller pockets of villages. And, it's really the village is what makes our societies strong. We are only as strong as our weakest link, I believe. And so when everybody rises up and they put their best foot forward, their best face forward, they put their hearts forward in lieu of everything else, that is when we see societies heal. That's when we see communities come together based on similar values. And really, this is where we can see the change that we do need to see in the world. So share those stories with me, because I would love to hear them. If you know of somebody else out there that has just done incredible things to support an individual in their community, an animal in their community, a business in their community, anything, please let me know, because we want to share those stories on our podcast. Now, of course, we have to address, and I want to address, all the individuals that have family members that have been afflicted by COVID. And of course, all of those members of society, our global society, that have passed away suddenly as a result of this illness. My heart goes out to all of the families and friends and communities that have lost someone to this virus, because of the fact that it just came on so fast, so suddenly. Yes, it could have happened as a result of influenza and the everyday flus that we are, that we're aware of, that can affect us. But at the same time, when it's something like this, it just makes it that much harder, because of the fact that it truly is so unexpected, and because it's a global issue that's happening. So it's not just happening, to people in North America, but it's happening to people in every single country on the planet right now. So my heart goes out to everybody, and I am so deeply sorry for the loss that you are experiencing during this time, because it's already hard enough to not have work, to potentially be losing your business, to be laid off from your job, but then to have something like that happen as well. It is a double whammy. So as we move forward, I want to thank everybody for continuing to self-distance, because this is so crucial that we do that. And for anybody who doesn't understand why we need to self-distance or self-isolate, or at least be away from other people, no matter what term you want to give it. But we need to do this to flatten the curve. We need to do this to take the strain off of our healthcare clinics and hospitals, and especially to take the burden off of our healthcare workers who are right now just working 24/7 around the clock, to be able to help people who have their already existing chronic health conditions, but then also to help the individuals that are now afflicted by COVID-19. So it's a double whammy to them as well. And I just want to say thank you to everybody for continuing to do that, despite whatever you think COVID-19 is about. Maybe you're not taking it seriously. Maybe you haven't thought that self-distancing is important and that it's not going to do anything, but we do know that it is helping to lessen the impact of this pandemic. So thank you, thank you, thank you for continuing to self-distance until, really governments and our leaders are able to turn around and say that it's over and that we can connect again in person, face to face. So many of you might be wondering, especially from the Eat Real to Heal perspective, what you can do to optimize your immune system. And every single week, while we're in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic, I am hosting a 1-hour webinar. It's a mini course, call it whatever you want, but show up at 1:00 Pacific Standard Time on Tuesdays and Thursdays. You can follow the link below so that you can register and get notifications when the webinar is going live. And I'm going to walk you through everything that you need to do to optimize your health, not just for this pandemic, but for all future pandemics, because it's going to happen again, folks. And if you're in your 30s now or 40s or 50s now, and you're faced with another pandemic in 20, 30, 40 years, well, let me tell you something. You are going to be an elderly individual with potentially a compromised immune system. And I'm telling you, you do not want this virus to take you out in 20, 30, 40 years or whatever new virus that's out there. You want to have an amazing immune system. And the only person that's in charge of creating that and giving that to you is yourself. So jump onto our webinar, follow the link below, because I'm going to teach you everything that you need to do that goes way beyond just washing your hands, self-distancing, and coughing into your elbow, but that actually goes into what you do in your kitchen, what you do to support your liver, how you support all of your organs, and how you can use your home right now as a living pharmacy. You have control over this, and I'm going to teach you how and walk you how to do that. So sign up for that webinar. Can't wait to see you online. Now, the last thing I just want to finish with is take this time to learn. Please take this time to learn, because you may never be given this time again, or at least not for a long while, where you have the opportunity to either numb yourself out right now, or you have the opportunity to pick up a book, or you can get a book on Audible or any other digital download online through Amazon, through your local bookstore. They probably have digital downloads for you, but learn something about what it takes to optimize your immune system. So if you don't want to learn it from me, learn it from a book. Learn how to cook a plant-based whole food meal that doesn't have any refined sugar, refined salt, or refined oil in it. Learn a new recipe. Make it for your family, or if there's kids out there listening to this, make it for your parents. Like, get involved in understanding how to turn your kitchen into a local pharmacy. Okay, and pharmacy, that's spelled Pharmacy. Also, take this time that if you're one of the many people who have attended our retreats or, signed up as a client, and they've said, well, I don't really like vegetables. I'm here to tell you that if you just take the time to find a recipe to prepare your vegetables in a certain way that will feel good to you, that it'll taste good, that the textures will be right. Maybe you want it raw, maybe you want it cooked, maybe you want it baked or steamed. It doesn't matter. But you just need to find a way to truly love eating fruits and vegetables in abundance, because that is where the foundation of optimizing your health comes from. It's the foundation of reversing chronic disease. It's the foundation of optimizing your microbiome and so much more. So please take this time while we have time to learn a new skill. And again, if you learn something, take a picture of it, take your picture of yourself in action, send it to me, because I really want to know what new information, what new skills you're acquiring. And then I can share what you've learned and what you've done with our collective community and all our listeners on the Eat Real to Heal podcast. And then they can learn from you. So let's allow that information to flow through all of us during this time, because it is the way that we're all going to learn how to eat real, to heal, and how to live a long, vibrant life free of chronic disease. Okay, that's it for now. Let's jump into this amazing podcast with Dr. Terry Wahls. Thank you so much for being here, and please share this podcast with everyone you know. Have a great day. Bye. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our Eat Real to Heal show. I am Nicolette, and I am your host of this podcast where we interview scientists and doctors and healing heroes, humans on this planet that have gone ahead and decided that they wanted to reclaim their health, reclaim their life, kick the chronic disease, get rid of the pain, the anxiety, the mental health illness, and all the other chronic illnesses that they are suffering from. So those are our true healing heroes when they decide to return to food as medicine and return to the principles of nature to be able to build resilience in their body and build sustained health. What I love about these healing heroes is that when they take that action to turn their health around, they become an inspiration and a motivation for thousands of other people who get to hear their story. So this podcast is all about sharing stories. And on today's show, I'm interviewing Dr. Terry Wahls again. She was on our show just recently, but because of the wealth of information that she has, we knew we had to bring her back. Not only that, but she has her new book that is out. It is based on the protocol, the Dr. Terry Wahls Protocol, and she just dives deeper into all of the tools and resources that you need to be able to succeed in reversing your multiple sclerosis, in reversing all the symptoms of any other chronic disease that you have, whether it's an autoimmune disorder like type 2 diabetes or any other type of autoimmune disorder. Could be heart disease, mental health illnesses. It works if you have infertility issues, because ultimately it's like the program that I teach, the Gerson Therapy. It's all about rebuilding your body and rebuilding the self-healing mechanisms in your body so that your body self-heals from whatever it is afflicted with. So your body has the disease as a result of your lifestyle, as a result of your diet and the stress and the lack of physical activity or too much physical activity. And what Dr. Terry Wahls is teaching in her book is how to be able to use your kitchen as your local pharmacy to be able to reverse multiple sclerosis and the host of other chronic degenerative diseases that are out there. Now, she did it herself. She was for years in a wheelchair, not able to walk, and really the medications she was taking were not working. The treatments she was undergoing were not working. And as a medical doctor, to really turn around and have that epiphany that food is medicine, and then want to research it and then apply it to herself, and then to be able to get the results that she did is truly miraculous. It is amazing. And so she's an inspiration to other physicians, to other healthcare workers and health coaches, and ultimately to myself as well, which is why we have her here. Before we dive into that beautiful interview with her, let me just tell you about a few things that we have going on. We've announced our 22 million strong campaign, and this is where I, Nicolette Richey, the CEO of the Green Mustache, and Richer Help, I'm going to be getting my ass out of my office chair from behind my computer, and I'm going to be sticking it on a bike. I'm also going to be running. So I'm going to be biking and running from Pemberton, British Columbia, Canada, all the way down to California. My aim is that I want to meet Oprah, because Oprah interviewed Charlotte Gerson decades ago, and she had her on the show, and Charlotte Gerson talked about the healing power of the Gerson Therapy, which is food as medicine, which is all about plant-based whole foods as medicine. Well, that caused quite a stir in the food industry and food lobby groups. And so I think it's perfect timing for me to connect with Oprah again, as someone who has been teaching the Gerson Therapy for the last 12 years, researching food as medicine for 22 years, and I was directly trained by Charlotte Gerson. She has since passed as of February 10th last year, and I want to honor her legacy by continuing to spread the Gerson Therapy message, but also by continuing to spread the message that food is medicine. So I hope you all join me on that tour. We're going to have links in the show notes. We're going to have links on our website so that you can find all the ways that you can support us, whether it's through sponsorship, donation, or by getting on your bike and riding with me, or lacing up your running shoes and running with me at any leg in this journey from Pemberton all the way down to California. We're going to be stopping in hospitals and schools and health institutions of all kinds, plant-based cafes, you name it. We're going to be stopping so that we can inspire and educate people to be able to turn to using all of the healing properties that are around us. So the food and the sunlight and, looking at soil regeneration and talking about all these important topics so that we can really work together to secure food and healthy food for years to come for our communities and our global society. So join us for that. And now let's jump back in to the interview with Dr. Terry Wahls. Thanks for being with us. And you know what to do after you listen to this podcast. Send us a note, tell us what you thought about it, but also more importantly, share it with those people that you love, that you know are afflicted by a chronic degenerative disease, or those people that you know aren't living the lifestyle that is going to be able to prevent an illness. So they may not have it yet, but you know that if they continue to eat the way they do and live the way they do, that it's just a matter of time. So send them this podcast, inspire them to start taking action today. Welcome back, everyone, to our Eat Real to Heal show. I am Nicolette, your host of this podcast. And once again, we have the incredible Dr. Terry Wahls on our show. Welcome, Terry, back to our show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, it's always a pleasure chatting with you because of the fact that there's two aspects that I just have always admired about you since I saw your TED Talk. One was that you are a physician and you have this scientific background and you're excited about the biology and the chemistry and the biochemistry, and that really shows. But the second part is you're able to take that information and translate it into a way that people, the average person, somebody, for example, who just gets recently diagnosed with multiple sclerosis or any other disease, that they can actually connect with you and say, oh, okay, I understand what you're saying. There's a relationship between nature, diet, and our disease. So those are the two reasons why I just love having you on the show. And I know that our guests have also said the same thing as well. You're very relatable.
One of my favorite professors taught me that at the end of every clinical encounter, you should ask them, what did they learn and what are they going to do? So I did that, and I learned that I had to speak in ways that were relatable and use metaphors that could relate to them given their profession and their background. And so my patients taught me how to talk using ordinary English and ordinary metaphors.
Yeah, and it is challenging because I know, it doesn't have to be challenging, but I do know how, anytime I go to speak in an event, and you speak at a lot of events, don't you? You're very selective as well as to the events that you speak at. So I tend to be working with an audience who's never, ever, ever contemplated the fact that their illness has anything to do with their diet. And in fact, a lot of the oncologists and other physicians that write in their reports that they send them to me will actually say, don't bother changing your diet. Your disease has nothing to do with your disease. And I've had many, many physicians say that to my clients. And so when I get into a room, I just taught a group of healthcare practitioners in New York City a few weeks ago. And I said to them, who here remembers the Krebs cycle and what it does and the purpose of it? And nobody put up their hand. And, and I said, well, who here knows what mitochondria is? And I love that was the title of your TED Talk, Mind Your Mitochondria, which I just fell in love with that title. And they were like, yeah, I can't really tell you. So even at the end of the day, there's a lot of physicians who were trained to diagnose and then prescribe. So they are not really going back to those first early courses in biochemistry and chemistry.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to memorize all that stuff and get through it. And then we got into clinical care, and that's exciting. We're seeing patients. And That's the stuff that we use, that basic science, that basic chemistry, we forget. And then, of course, the new biochemistry, the new insights that we have about epigenetics and the microbiome, we weren't taught in medical school when I went to medical school. And so there's all that new stuff that we're sort of, if you're lucky, learning. But a lot of people, they're too busy. They don't know any of that stuff.
Right. And for, getting in front of an audience and when you're speaking to a group of physicians as well at a conference, I mean, are you diving deep just into the science, or are you also, taking it back a step and helping draw those analogies for the physicians as well?
I'm helping them understand. So I still talk a lot of biochemistry, a lot of basic science, so they know I'm not making this stuff up. But I have to make it very relatable so that you can understand this if you're a neurologist, a oncologist, a rheumatologist, a psychiatrist, or a physical therapist, occupational therapist. So I will do this grounded in science, but I teach them the science as I go, assuming that they too have forgotten it.
Yeah.
Because they probably have. And then I also spend a lot of time talking about how you talk to your patients.
And how do you talk to your patients? Because, so are you currently seeing patients right now? Or are you just focused on
so I'm still seeing patients, and I think it's important to continue seeing patients. One, it's immensely satisfying, and it keeps me current and grounded in the practice of medicine. I also do research 3 days a week. I'm in with my research team, and I'll be in tomorrow morning. And then I travel the world, teaching at conferences all over the globe to try and get this message out. And I teach the public as well.
Okay. So for the audience, for the listeners right now who haven't listened to Dr. Wahls' podcast on our show, go back and listen to that one, because that's when we really dive into the history that has led Dr. Terry Wahls to where she is now. So being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, taking the best meds that were available, not seeing results, health declining, and then really realizing that food is medicine. You made that discovery, and then you started experimenting with different, diets and protocols until you were able to piece together the biochemistry and the science around food and nutrition and as it related to multiple sclerosis. And now, Dr. Terry Wahls, I mean, for some of you, most of you will be listening to this, through your car phone or your headphones, so you're not going to actually see her, but she was in an anti-gravity chair, in a wheelchair, and now you are cycling and active and, walking and doing all your rounds and healthy. I mean, you're one of the healthiest women I know now. And so for people who are listening, it's to know that, multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune disorder, and it is related to our lifestyle. And because it's related to our lifestyle and diet, we have the ability to reverse the symptoms. Did I summarize that correctly from our last podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd had 27 years of relentless worsening due to trigeminal neuralgia. So electrical face pains that were really quite horrific by the end. I had 7 years of relentless worsening of disability due to multiple sclerosis. Again, despite being the best people, taking the most drugs, relentless decline. But fortunately, I'm a scientist, I'm a physician, I'm reading, I'm experimenting, and I create this diet and lifestyle program designed meticulously for my brain. And because I knew I had this incurable disease, I had no expectation that I would improve, no expectation that I was going to recover. I just wanted to slow down my decline as much as I could. And so I was quite stunned when I recovered, and quite stunned as I was getting stronger, and stunned as I'm walking again. And then even more stunned when I get on my bike and I'm biking. My kids are crying, my wife's crying, I'm crying. And then I bike 18.5 miles, and then we're all crying again. Mm-hmm. And of course, this changes how I think about disease and health, and it will change the way I practice medicine, and it changes the type of research that I do. In fact, this is now my focus of research.
And that's the part that truly amazes me, that I think that, I mean, even just that, when you say you were, walking and crying and biking and your family's crying and you're realizing that you're getting better, this is the part that I would have loved to be able to dive into your brain and experience those emotions and everything.
Okay.
Well, because
Well,
of, right, like, can we go there? Because that must have been massive, because this must have been a paradigm shift for you.
when you have a progressive illness, neurodegenerative disease, probably any progressive illness that is incurable, one of the strategies is you go through anger, bargaining, depression, and then you finally get to acceptance. And so I accepted that I was going to be bedridden, demented, and quite possibly living with intractable pain. Um, so as these pains turn on, light triggers the pain, sound triggers the pain, a breeze on my skin triggers the pain, touch by my children trying to comfort me triggers the pain, and I'm trying to hold still as they're comforting me and not grimace, because I don't want them to think their touch is painful, although it is horrifically painful. So, and in 2007, I can't sit up. I'm beginning to have brain fog. My pain is much more difficult to manage. I have discovered functional medicine. I've taken their course on neuroprotection. I have a longer list of supplements. I've already been on the paleo diet for 4 years. And then I had this really big aha, like, what if I redesign my diet based on what I was doing in the supplement form? So again, that's several more months of research, and I do that. And so on December 26th, I start this new way of eating.
December
And
26th, like the day after Christmas.
the day after Christmas.
Okay.
And
Yep.
it's still a paleo diet. I'm still avoiding the same things,
Yep.
but now I've ramped up my greens. I'm eating only organic meats. I adding liver for the first time. I'm adding a lot more cabbage, onion, mushrooms. And so first thing that I realize is, so at the end of the month, my pain is gone. And then I realized I'm not as exhausted. And then the next thing is I can sit in a regular chair at supper. I mean, I can sit up at the table. And then we're about 2 months into this, maybe it was 3, I have a letter to mail. And I decide that I'm gonna walk down the hall and mail my letter instead of taking my wheelchair. So I grab my walking sticks and I walk down the hall, and my colleagues are, Dr. Wahls, you're walking. 4 years earlier, they said, Dr. Wahls, what happened to you, when they saw me in that wheelchair for the first time? And so I start walking with my walking sticks. Then I don't need them. I'm walking around the hospital, and I can walk around the block at my home. And it's probably about 4 months into this way of eating. And I'm mentioning to my wife, like, because I really like biking, and that was a big family thing that we'd done. I said, do you think I could try biking again? Because it had been 5 years, maybe 6 years since I'd been on my bike. And she said, well, maybe if things keep going well, maybe this fall we can try. And then 2 weeks later, it was Mother's Day. And I decided I wanted to try riding my bike. So I was in the garage, and my son, who's 6'5", almost 6'6", was riding my bike. So I adjusted the seat. I put it down. My kids heard me in the garage. They come running out. They grab the bike from me, like, no, mom, you can't risk that. We don't want to lose all this progress you made. So they're crying. Jackie comes out. And we had this emergency family meeting. Should I bike? Should I not bike? Now, fortunately, what Jack decides is she'll have my son, this big strapping boy, run on the left. My daughter will run along in the right, and she'll follow on the bike. And we walk the bike down. We stand next to the curb. I get my leg, we're all ready. And Jack says she's watching for the traffic. She'll give us the all clear sign. And she says, okay. And I push off, wobble a little bit, and then I'm going. My son's crying. My daughter's crying, and I'm crying. Jackie gives me a big hug, because it was at that moment I understood that the current understanding of MS was incomplete.
Mm-hmm.
That the understanding of MS as an incurable disease, even progressive MS as an incurable disease, was wrong. And that who knew how much recovery might be possible. So that was on Mother's Day, May 8th. Then I kept biking a little bit further. And then Jack saw that there was a big bike ride, the Courage Ride, a fundraiser for the Cancer Society. So it's 18.5 miles. We thought, okay, that's pretty far. I probably can't bike that far. But however far I could bike, I knew I could do 8 miles because we'd worked our way up to that. So we signed up, and I talked to my physical therapist, said, oh yeah, I'll go for it. That'd be fine. I didn't tell my neurologist, but I figured if my physical therapist said it was fine for you to do this, that was good enough. And I did it. I biked 18.5 miles. So once again, we're all crying. My son and daughter are crying. Jackie's crying. I'm crying. I'm pretty tired. But,
I bet.
and again, it was so clear that how I practice medicine changed. After that, I spent much more time talking to my patients about what they were eating, what they were doing. And as I got people fired up about eating vegetables, fired up about walking, and fired up that, yes, they could change the trajectory of their health. What I saw was people were needing fewer and fewer drugs. I was getting people off drugs. The residents in the primary care clinic were like, that they couldn't wait for me to go talk to their patients, because they knew I had this amazing ability to inspire even the most hardened, grizzled, cantankerous lady or gentleman,
Mm-hmm.
to get them willing to see that it's possible they could improve. And so we saw some remarkable transformations in that clinic.
So your story resonates with me so deeply, because one of my clients about 7 years ago, she was riddled with endometriosis, and she was told that she needed to, have a hysterectomy, and they had already opened her up once and scraped her out all the adhesions, and then sent her home and said, you have to take these drugs. They didn't make her feel well. And they said, well, and sure enough, her endometriosis came flaring back up. And she was riddled again with all the adhesions. So they said, oh, and this was only within 6 months. And they said, no worries, come back in. We'll just open you up and scrape you out again. And she had not ridden her bike as well for about 4 or 5 years. And so she did our therapy, which is very similar to yours. And for anybody that's listening, I know you heard, Dr. Terry Wahls mention, healthy organic meats. And I know you have a vegan protocol as well. So we'll get into that later. But, she did our protocol, which is fully plant-based, and, all the greens and fruits and vegetables and everything else that you need to rebuild your mitochondria and you need to rebuild your health. But that was the thing, is that when she healed, and it took about 3 months, but after 3 months, she went from crawling from her bedroom to her bathroom and with two young kids running around and she couldn't take care of them, to being able to stand in the kitchen, prep all her food on her own, make, everything that she needed to do. And after she was done the therapy and fully healed, that was the first thing she did. Is she went on a bike ride with her girls and she came back with tears streaming down her face.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought she had fallen or was in an accident. I didn't realize what had happened. And she's like, I had not been able to ride a bike in, 4 or 5 years. And you really see that people do get their lives back. It's those moments with your children where you can just move with them, right? That are
Absolutely.
so profound. So when you went back to the clinic and you started teaching patients, what did that look like for you? Like, how did you
Well,
even start this?
in Iowa, people grow a lot of corn.
Yes.
And many of our patients have agricultural background. And so I'd ask them, like, so if you want to have a champion steer or a champion swine at the county farm, state farm, but you're probably very particular about the food that you're feeding the animal. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so if you want a blue ribbon or a champion steer, you got to give them champion quality food. Absolutely. Well, if you want championship health, we have to start giving you food that would give you the championship body that goes with that. And
Smart.
so they could relate to that, or they could relate to, if you don't test the soil and fertilize the soil, you're not going to get a high yield on your corn. They could relate to that. Or if they're in the mechanic world, I would ask them, so what would happen to your engines if you poured in corn syrup in the engine? Would that gum up the fuel line at all? Oh, yeah, hell no. Yeah. And if you had a Ferrari, would you be pouring that corn syrup into the gas line? Well, no. Well, the same things are happening to you. And what you need to know is that life is self-correcting chemistry. If they can get the junk out of the gas line, because life is a series of self-correcting biochemical steps, their cells can, as they're doing the chemistry of life correctly, rebuild these misshapen molecules, and they can repair their gas line, they can repair the blood vessels, they can repair a considerable amount of their structure. And so what people would discover is that, yes, they could do this, and that their energy improved, their pain diminished, their blood pressure improved, their blood sugars improved, and that their quality of life improved.
And okay, so these consults that you're having with your patients, are they a typical doctor-patient consult, like in the typical 7.5 minutes to 15 minutes? So
Well, the VA was a little bit longer, so we got 20 minutes.
Oh, wow, that's impressive.
And that's with the residents, so I only have about 5.
Okay.
Because the residents are, doing their spiel. And then I get about 5 minutes to tell the story, do the inspiration, and make a suggestion. Then the resident follows up on that.
And so this is really critical for everybody that is listening, because I think that I feel it's the answer to doctor-patient relationships across the globe. That you go into the appointment, you have a sense of who these individuals are, like a little bit about them. If they love cars, if they love agriculture, if they're, you are relating
if they're
to
teachers.
them.
I mean, I know their occupational background.
Exactly.
And I know their age.
So that's what you need to know. Awesome. So you need to know their occupational background. Their age is helpful too, because then you can put it in context, right, of the right era.
Correct.
And then within that, you are able to relate to them and draw an analogy between diet and their health and whatever it is that they're interested in.
And they use metaphors that would work in a mechanical sense, in an agricultural sense, in a teaching sense, or in I make it relate to their occupational interest.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's brilliant, right? Because I mean, it just, number one, it shows you're listening and that you care and that, you are able to have that breakthrough with them. And then did these individuals, and I'm sure this applies to the residents because the residents are standing around listening to this as well. At any point, do any of these individuals feel that you were misdiagnosed, that you didn't have MS? Because I hear that a lot of times when my clients heal. And did anyone, potentially feel that you were just in remission at this point when you start teaching people?
So yeah, all over the globe, when I first started talking about, MS can be stabilized and reversed, you really have to address diet and lifestyle. Huge pushback in the neurology, neuroscience community. They said I clearly never had MS because you can't recover. The dramatic improvement that I achieved just does not happen. My physicians were incompetent. And so the University of Iowa was thrilled that I went to see some of the best MS centers in the country, so they couldn't be accused of incompetence alone. And so my response to that is, okay, let's say that somehow all of my neurology physicians were incompetent and I didn't have MS. Then we have the fact that I've done multiple clinical trials where we prospectively verify their diagnosis, enroll them in the trial, use my protocols, follow them, and see the outcomes, and have consistently been able to show statistically and clinically meaningful improvement in quality of life and function. And I'll be starting my 5th trial.
Which is
So
impressive. That is impressive.
So even if, I didn't have MS, I had something else. Even if that was true, the most important question is, have I helped others? And have I done it in peer-reviewed, published clinical trials? The answer is yes.
Mm-hmm.
We have many papers out there. And then we could go to what are other physicians experiencing when they treat their MS patients using diet and lifestyle principles that I teach. And they find that their patients improve and their quality of life improves and the clinical outcomes improve. And then we have the millions of followers that I have who are coming in, contacting us every week saying that they have their autoimmune condition that was could no longer be managed, and the physician says, "Look, there's nothing else I can offer you." And fortunately, someone tells them about me, and they read my book and begin implementing the concepts, and they discover they have less pain, they have more mental clarity, a better mood, and then they discover that they got to start reducing their blood pressure meds because they're getting lightheaded, or they have to start reducing their blood sugar meds because they're getting lightheaded because they're hypoglycemic.
Yeah.
And they realize that they're not taking their pain meds because they have so much less pain. And then they go see their specialist who says, "Damn, you must have made a mistake because you don't really qualify, meet criteria for this disease state anymore. And I don't know what's going on, but you better keep it up." And so some of these physicians reach out to me and say, "At first I thought it was crazy talk that you had, but now I'm telling my patients to get your book."
That is amazing because I know in Canada, I don't know, I'm really curious about this. The fact that we have, socialized medicine up here that is, been around for a long time, thanks to, Tommy Douglas and all the policy work he did, that, people just go to the doctors and you don't have to wait in too many lineups and you get your prescription, you go home, and nobody's really questioning the medical system the way that it's happening in the States. We know that Americans spend way more on alternative healthcare than Canadians do. We know, and part of that I think is because of the high medical expenses,
Yeah.
right? And the bills and the high insurance and everything like that. So I, imagine that people have anyway, they're just maybe more curious into all the alternatives. But I know up here, and this has happened, like my daughter was disqualified from a clinical trial based on, she had broken her radial head on her left elbow. And so she was part of a clinical trial that was happening through one of the universities. And she healed in 6 weeks versus the 1 year. And, my kids have been raised on plant-based whole food diet, high nutrient intake, clean food,
Yes.
It's all organic. And so they said, well, we have to disqualify her from the study because she's an outlier. And I said, don't you want to ask me what she's doing? And they're like, no, that's okay. Nobody asked me. And I said, well, you should ask me what we do differently and why she potentially is not like the other children in the study and all the thousands of people that have been studied before this moment. And
Yeah.
so, and I see it a lot too when my clients, because I'm not a medical doctor, so I have to work with the physicians and they get all the tests and they do everything and they see the results. They see the client come in on all these meds or be put on all these meds. Then they
Mhm.
come to us and do our program. Then the physician has to say, well, you don't need these meds anymore. You don't qualify for them because the symptoms are gone. So then they're off their meds. But I can tell you this, very few doctors have asked
Yeah.
my clients or asked me like, hey, what are you doing?
Isn't that
And
interesting? And I talk about that. How do we learn? How do we learn something new?
mhm,
As a species, it's very difficult because I mean, part of it. I'll explain why that is. There's so much information coming to us, to our brain, all the time.
yeah,
The big job of your brain is to filter out information into a manageable pattern. So you and I have created patterns to understand the world, and we probably ignore 99% of the information coming to us. Now, unfortunately, what that means is it's incredibly hard to learn anything new
mhm,
because we ignore most of that information. And so your physician colleagues, and unfortunately, you and I do this too. There's new things coming in that are happening all the time. And because it doesn't fit into their pattern of how they understand the world, they ignore it. They ignore it. They ignore it. It's the rare individual who can finally realize, like, wait a minute, that unexpected bit of information is really interesting. And why is it like that? And that curiosity is how you learn. Uh, it makes me much more humble about why people don't learn new things. It also keeps me humble about what are the new interesting things that are popping up that I should be paying attention to that
100%.
I can't manage because in order to get by, I have to ignore 99% of the information coming to me. And so
True.
I have to be selective as to what's that 1% I'm going to pay attention to.
Yeah, that's a good
It's
point.
also why, um, you get a set of ideas, people get a set of ideas. It is incredibly hard to change that. And
Mhm.
we'll ignore mountains of information.
Well, it definitely, puts it's almost like it's holding up a mirror to their life and saying, okay, well, this is everything you thought you were and you thought you knew. And now you are being tested. You're being,
Mhm.
it's your worldview. It's that shift that is being questioned and shifting. Hopefully, if the person's curious enough to want
You
to
know,
learn more.
it will happen. It will take a while. I feel incredibly optimistic because, I mean, in my own experience, in 2009, I started teaching, my concepts, and I'm banned as a speaker by the MS Society for creating false hope. I get chastised by my chief of staff and
Okay,
the
whoa, whoa,
head of
whoa.
medicine.
So, sorry, let's go back. You were banned by the MS Society for creating false hope.
Yes,
Has that
yes.
been changed?
Well, yes, I'll tell you that story.
Okay,
So,
we got
so
to get to that
2009,
story.
I'm banned. I have to go meet with the chief of staff because Terry, what's going on? People are upset. They're complaining about you. You're being banned. And I brought my stack of scientific papers, went through them, and I got some feedback about talking a little more carefully about this stuff in public. And so I changed how I document the record. I put out disclaimers when I spoke in the public, but I kept speaking because I'm a little socially awkward and I don't exactly follow directions the best.
Love that about you. Yeah.
And I kept writing my little grants, and I finally got my little trial going. And we had a huge difficulty getting although we had strikingly positive results, like, oh my God, it was so difficult for us to get those papers published.
I remember
But
that first study. I remember everything. I followed it in the media. I followed the feedback. And I mean, I just couldn't have
yes,
imagined being you in that moment here, having done this trial and clinical trial. And then, or the first, was that one
yeah,
a study or a
yeah,
clinical
it was a
trial?
clinical trial. So we
Yeah.
did the TED Talk that went viral. Then I got my book deal. it had, you know, the book come out in 2014. And then the MS Society had a wellness meeting, and they tracked me down, got me to invited me. I said, well, you know, I'm going to have to rearrange my schedule because I'm a plenary speaker at another conference. I have to see if I can get that moved. And, but you also have to address the fact I'm a banned speaker, and I can't come to your conference as a banned speaker. So they apologized, they unbanned me. I went to the conference, and they agreed that they would make dietary intervention studies and lifestyle studies a part of the research priority.
Amazing.
And so that was 2015. Then 2016, they gave us, my research lab, $1 million to conduct a clinical trial comparing a low-fat swank diet to the Wahls diet. We just finished that study, and we're analyzing the data. So I'm hoping we'll be presenting that in the fall, although it may be next spring.
Right.
One of those 2 times that'll be showing up. And just yesterday, so now I'm being funded. We're starting our 5th clinical trial. We've got 13 papers that we've put out on the previous 3 in the 4th trial in the previous 4 trials, we have 13 papers. And then yesterday, I had this lovely conversation with a representative from Wellmark Blue Cross and Blue Shield, which is of Iowa, the major health insurance provider in the state of Iowa. Wanted to know if I'd be interested in collaborating with them on press releases and educational materials for the MS population to get them fired up about diet and lifestyle and the research that I do. So I said, oh yeah, of course I'd love to. So I'm talking to the copywriters. They're going to be writing these articles. And then they said, and we'd really like to come send a video team out to talk to you in your lab, maybe get some video of you biking. I said, yes, that would be lovely. So I've been for 5 years wanting to find a partner in the health insurance industry to help get this message out. So I'm thrilled now that that's happening. And so I see the length of time it went from being banned as dangerous and harmful to getting research funding to being hailed as this brilliant visionary and receiving international awards. That all happened in 10 years.
Which is a fast timeline.
It's a
because
fast time.
A lot of other doctors before you who understood that food is medicine, like going back, I teach the Gerson Therapy, so this is going back to 1918. Yeah. And I mean, Dr. Max Gerson had to fight for his entire life, and, right down to like the death threats and the, all his files being stolen and all of these things. So, I mean, he spent his whole life. So we, and that was, when I look at that history, I'm like, I just don't know how one person could do that for their entire life, be ostracized by the medical community, only have a few close colleagues who like understood the work that they're doing. So that's, I mean, it's hard work, but 10 years is also a long time, but it is fast in the history of
it's incredibly
medicine.
Fast.
Yeah.
The reason there are not many people who can do this. And to do this well, there are a couple of things that probably need to happen. One is you have to be a little socially oblivious.
True. That's a good point.
So that stuff doesn't bother you. And it's probably helpful to be an introvert. So he was probably an introvert. He probably like me, much. A little socially oblivious.
Yep.
It's much harder for the family. So this is much harder for my spouse, to watch the trauma.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I knew the grim future that I was facing in 2007. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's not what happened. So I have this incredible gift, and I just feel like, everyone else should know that they could decide for themselves, are vegetables risky or are vegetables pretty safe? Is meditation risky or is meditation pretty safe? Is working with a physical therapist to help you increase your physical activity risky or is that pretty safe? And is combining all 3 of those things risky or pretty safe? And You don't have to have your neurologist fired up about that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But you could have a primary care doctor who's willing to say, you know what, I'll watch you for if you're going to start eating more vegetables.
Yeah.
I'll watch you and refer you if you want some help in learning how to meditate. And sure, I'll give you a referral to go see a physical therapist. So your primary care doc can be all the support that you need.
Right.
And that this doesn't have to be a either or. Either you do the Wahls therapy or you do drugs. You can do both.
Mm-hmm.
There's no
So for someone who comes to you who is on the medications, they've already been diagnosed, and then they hear about you, and then they're like, oh my goodness, there's a possibility that I can reduce my meds and I can
yeah.
be symptom free. So how do you work with, or for anybody else who's listening who's wondering about this, it's that
Sure.
there's a weaning off the medication approach. So
You know,
how do you know when they're getting better?
so if you stop disease modifying therapy abruptly, the research is very clear, the clinical experience is very clear. You can expect to have activation of the immune cells. They will be hyperactive, and the person will likely experience a severe rebound of symptoms. And depending on your disease state, for MS, it's a severe neurologic event. For inflammatory bowel disease, it's a severe diarrhea and belly pain. For skin, it's a severe flare of red, terrible skin lesions. Rheumatoid arthritis is severe disabling joint pain.
Yeah.
So then the question is, so you stay on your drugs, you begin doing the diet and lifestyle stuff. If you are blessed that you've discovered, like, you know what, I am feeling better. My quality of life has improved. My mood, energy, mental clarity is better. And my organ-specific symptoms are less. And if it's your skin, that's pretty obvious. You can just look at your skin, it's better. If it's your joint, you can look at your joints, they're not red. If it's your brain, that's a little harder to look at. So now you're going to have to look at sensation, motor, mood, thinking ability. And your specialist would probably know what are the lab and x-ray monitoring that they could use to assess for disease activity.
Mm-hmm.
And they could say, like, well, the standard assessment interval is every 6 months or every year or every 3 months, again, depending on your disease state and the severity of your symptoms. And they'd be able to tell you that, well, clinically, your disease is inactive. And biologically, by the measures that I can assess, your disease is either active or it's inactive or stable. And then it will depend on, again, on your age and your disease state, based on the research. Like, if your disease is stable in the MS world for 3 years and you're over the age of 44, staying on the drugs or going off the drugs, the risk of relapse is the same. And so for the 46-year-old who's had 3 years of quiet disease and no activity on the blood markers and the MRI markers, many physicians are now saying, you know what, if you want to go off your drugs, go off your drugs, because the drugs are costly and have their own risk profile. We have no research that says you're on the drugs, your disease is quiet, you're really doing a good job on diet and lifestyle, you are safe to go off after 6 months or after 3 months or after a year. So we don't really know, because none of those other studies factored in what happens if you really did diet and lifestyle.
Right.
That's a future study. We're going to be writing those grants. That's certainly a study I would love to do, is to bring everyone in on diet and on drugs, put them on diet and lifestyle, and randomize half of them to placebo or staying on the drugs and seeing how they do.
So how do you randomize a group to placebo when you are doing a nutritional study like this? Because you're not giving them,
Oh,
greens
okay.
that are in a
So
pill form. How do we do this?
this is a great question. Thank you so much. So you cannot have a randomized double-blind control on a diet study because
Right.
obviously, if when you're doing a diet and lifestyle study, the person knows what food they're eating and what lifestyle or health behaviors you've asked them to engage in. So now you can do a controlled study where I bring you in, give you my food intervention. I could randomize you and say, I'll only train you after the interval period, say 6 months or a year, and half of you have to wait. So that's
Right.
called the waitlist control. And if the author's written a book, they'll say, screw you, I'll just buy the damn book.
Well, that's what I was going to ask next, right? Because if I even knew I was part of this, I'd start Googling and,
Yeah,
figure out what
yeah.
is this
So
protocol?
that's what we found. We tried doing a waitlist control, and I found like, oh my God, this is so hard because people
Yeah.
like, screw that, I'll just buy the book. So then the next thing we did was, and this was a very controversial decision, was we randomized between two diets that are popular in the MS community. The Swank diet, which is low fat, and the Wahls diet, which is the modified paleo diet.
Right.
We observed people for 12 weeks, then we randomize them, and then we bring them back, repeat the measures, and they have a lot of support from us for that first 12 weeks. Then we ask them to continue without so much support the next 12 weeks, and we measure them again. And so we'll be able to see, does diet improve things over the observation period, and then is one of these two diets better than the other?
Right. Because they're both diet protocols,
They're
right?
both
So,
diet
yeah.
protocols, and they're both popular within the MS community. So, and we don't really know which one is better.
Right.
So you don't have the dropout at randomization.
Right.
The next study we'll do will probably be the Wahls diet versus the dietary guidelines diet, and we will include an animal model to that diet, and there won't be an observation period. So we'll try that next. I think another study, again, that we'll be writing grants for is everybody gets diet and lifestyle. Half the folks will get drugs. Half the folks will be taken off their drugs.
Right.
And so that will be a we'll see if I can get funding for that. I think that would be a really interesting little study. Another study that you could do would be everybody gets diet and lifestyle. Newly diagnosed MS patients,
Right.
half get drugs, half get placebo at startup, and you see how people are at 1 year. The other study that'd be really interesting would be you stop drugs on people who are you doing diet and lifestyle. The challenge with stopping drugs is that we know that people have severe rebounds.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's going to be a bigger safety profile, but it's an incredibly important question. And maybe what you end up doing is diet and lifestyle for 6 months, and you have to demonstrate that you really have had a good clinical response to diet and lifestyle. And if you have, you stop the drugs in a randomized fashion with those who successfully implemented diet and lifestyle. And then you see how they do.
The subjects, the participants that are coming through these studies, I'm assuming they're highly motivated to find an answer to their illness, right? Because they have MS. Now, because they don't follow it within a laboratory setting, I mean, they're obviously, they're going home and preparing the foods on their own.
Yes, yeah.
And you teach them exactly how to prepare these foods and how to cook the foods?
No. So let me go back. In my clinics,
Mm-hmm.
the lifestyle clinics, we'd have cooking classes. We'd have mindfulness classes, meditation classes. We'd have personal mission classes, heroes classes, movement classes, cooking classes. So we did a lot of health behavior classes every month. And we had group support meetings every month.
Mm-hmm.
And so as part of my clinic, we absolutely taught all that stuff. As part of my intervention, because I only had people come 4 times in the year, we couldn't do classes. However, in the next study that we're doing, because I'm so impressed with the power of groups
Yes.
and the power of monthly support. Of course, now this took me about 8 months to get this through the IRB and to work out how we could do this. We are going to be able to do group calls so that we could have the benefit of monthly teaching and a monthly discussion about what are the challenges, what are the successes, answering questions, so that people would have more success. Because from my point of view, the failure or the success of our patients, it has much less to do with, did I order the right lab test? Did I give them the right diet? It was really about their struggle to adopt and sustain the health behavior changes that I want them to do. And
Which
that's
is a
because
which is
we're
applicable to also, any drug trials, right? It's also getting people
yes,
just to comply with taking the drugs at the right time and for the length of time that they
it's
need. And
complicated.
it is complicated.
Getting humans to change their behavior is tough. We
Yeah.
we are wired for pleasure. We're wired for comfort. We'll choose today's pleasures over tomorrow's future potential benefit. We will choose avoiding loss of today's pleasures over tomorrow's future benefit.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have thousands of generations of hardwiring in our brain built to make those choices. So just because I spent 5 minutes telling you why you ought to eat more vegetables,
Yeah.
which is what I did in clinic, it's very hard for people to succeed.
So how
So
do you get them to succeed?
what I've learned from my vets is helping them have a much more effective behavior change model by helping them tap into understanding their purpose, their why.
Great.
And and I ask them, is there something that you care, or someone you care so deeply about, that you would go into a burning building to save that person's life or that thing? And they'll look like, well, yeah, of course I do that for my kids or my wife or my grandchildren. Like, okay. So there's something that you care that much about. And help them link now that their love for that person, that mission, to that's why they want their health. Is that, and what would you like to be doing with your grandson or your granddaughter or your daughter? And now that I know of something that I really want to be doing with my person that I love and cherish, now it's my job to teach them how my diet and lifestyle and health behavior changes will help them achieve that goal that they just told me mattered so much to them that they would run into a burning house to save that person.
So I have to ask you, when you were diagnosed and then you started discovering food as medicine and then you were on this mission to understand it more, what was your why for all
All
of
of my
that?
children,
It was your children.
I had young kids, and it's very clear that I want my kids to be successful adults, emotionally and financially, I thought I was going to teach them how to do that by doing martial arts and mountain climbing and kayaking, wild rivers, and that was not going to happen. So I had to think deeply about, okay, what could I do? And I knew that they were watching me every day. And I could either model that life is difficult and you give up when things get hard, or that, yep, life is difficult. And no matter how difficult your circumstance is, you keep doing the best you can.
Mm-hmm.
And that my kids would have more responsibilities than their peers. I remember, both my kids did this at about the same age. They're really mad that they're having to do the laundry because none of their friends know anything about laundry soap or dryers or folding laundry. And it's so not fair. They're stamping their feet and they're, having a high volume conversation. And the empathist's like, oh yeah, that's so not fair. It's so not fair. I understand. And I feel that way too. It's so not fair that I have MS, but I have to go to work every day, see patients and do the best I can. And life's not fair. And I might feel sad about it, and then I pick myself up and I go do my work. And you might feel sad about your chores, but you pick yourself up because these are your chores and you're doing them.
Yeah.
And they'd stamp their little feet and say, Mom, I think you're glad you have MS so you can lecture me about chores. And of course, now they are horrified that I tell that story. But I laugh and say, you'll tell this story to your children and your grandchildren as well. This is an age-appropriate frustration that kids will experience.
100%, with or without having a mom with MS, right? I mean,
Yes.
my kids they're in that place too. My oldest daughter now loves having a clean house. So she's motivated because she loves having a clean house, not because I want it. And the other two definitely, they stamp their feet. But I personally think that kids nowadays anyway are not, they're not out there farming and hauling bales of hay and, sticking their arms, in, to support all the vet care that needed with animals and all that labor and everything. And so kids, I think they have it easy on a lot of sense, on the physical sense, maybe tougher on the tech side. Their little brains are being, hijacked is a good word for that. So yeah, but I think it's great for these kids to have these physical chores that they have to do, like cleaning bathrooms and doing laundry. And
I think it's really important for them to have chores that are meaningful, that contribute to family needs. I think my kids had to help prepare meals. Beginning, they were doing this at 5th and 6th grade, that one meal a week. They could pick out the recipe, and they were cooking with a lot of help, and of course with steadily less help. And so now both of my kids are very comfortable shopping, cooking, making menus, and they both understand that recipes are merely hints, simple suggestions, and they're both very comfortable with, okay, this is what I have on hand, and now I'm going to throw together a meal that's Caribbean inspired or Indian inspired or Southern inspired with the ingredients that I have on hand in either my freezer, my refrigerator, or my garden. These are vital skills that we parents should be teaching to all of our children so they could be successful adults.
100%. And I imagine that you have patients, and I think this is a really important piece about your protocol, is that when somebody comes in and they have been diagnosed with MS, I mean, their families can eat the same meals, right? You're not preparing multiple meals in the house, are you?
My recommendation is that this is a family intervention.
Right.
We discuss how the processed food industry is designed to create cravings and addictions. And so these foods that we've agreed are potentially quite harmful to the child that we're treating or the adult that we're treating. It will be far more successful if they're removed from their eating environment. So get rid of the harmful foods, have more of the foods that are healing, and that's what you eat. And so this is a family intervention. Now, if someone who's not affected by the illness wants to have an indiscretion away from the eating environment and not talk about it, that's their business. But you don't come home and say like, oh my God, I had the best pizza and beer with my friends last night. It was incredible. It was Chicago deep dish, amazing crust, amazing cheese, and the beer. Like, oh my God, that's torture.
Yeah.
So, and we laugh and we joke, and then acknowledge that, families figure out different levels of this is what you do. Some families are like, if it comes in the house, I'm throwing it away. Or if it comes in the house, it has to stay on that shelf or in that room. You have to eat it away. So everyone's going to negotiate that restriction to work within their family.
That's an interesting word, the word restriction, because one thing that I've definitely changed, because I see so many clients that come to me that have been on these elimination diets and their illness is still present. You know, if they eat a little bit of anything that's not part of whatever the practitioner or whoever said, you know, stay away from this, stay away from that. I mean, their disease flares up right away, which shows to me that, you know, maybe that the body isn't really healed. Whereas when we teach about nutrifying the body through an abundance and diversity of these incredible whole foods, all of a sudden they can actually, they overcome their allergies, they overcome everything. So
Mhm.
it is something I'm trying to shift with my clients. It's getting to think about the, you know, 150 to 250,000 different plant species that are edible, and to think, why not try new things? Like, you know, some people have never had turnips, and some people don't know what celeriac root is, and some people don't know, you know, even like people who have never even eaten beets or, you
Yeah,
know.
you know, I've had this big conversation over my goal for everyone is 200 plant species in a year, and they're like, "Oh my God, that's impossible." So, well, this is a wonderful, wonderful family activity. Start a
Yeah.
spreadsheet and keep track of every day. What are the different plant species you're having for your teas, your spices, your vegetables? And then over time, if you get the whole family on board, your kids are will likely get more excited, like, oh my God, what is that funny looking vegetable over there? We should bring that home. We got to try that out. We'll add that to the list. What are these different spices? And it makes it much more interesting, much more engaging.
I love that. That is a really, you gamify it, right? That is
You
exactly what you're,
gamify it.
yeah, I love
And, you know,
that.
whatever we measure, we can begin to change that behavior.
Yeah,
And when we decide that we're going to add diversity, we're adding to the information, the signals that speak to our genes that are turning on and off. We're adding to the information that can help me process and eliminate toxins. We're adding to the information that helps me optimize and tune up my cellular efficiency, the signals for repairing and healing my blood-brain barrier, my synapses. So lots of reasons to have the diversity. And again, if I think about Brunhilde and Beowulf, you know, thousands of generations ago, there's plenty of evidence that our ancestors would have had, and it didn't matter if my ancestors were from Europe or Africa or Australia or Asia or the Americas, they were probably having 200 plus plant species that they consumed in a year. And of
exactly.
course, it was, you know, local, seasonal, and it varied with the seasons and with their own personal migrations. But they had tremendous diversity.
Yeah. And I know for people who are listening that you're probably thinking, oh, I get diversity as well. But for anybody who's on a
Keep track.
standard American diet, you know, like you're from corn central USA, you know, you have such an abundance of corn. But for most people in the world right now, they who are living standard American, standard European diet, I mean, they're not eating
Yes,
more than
it's
five different
corn,
ingredients, right?
peas, corn, peas, carrots, potatoes, onions, green
Yeah.
beans, and then they're pretty stuck after that.
Yeah. And then maybe the other stuff is like wheat and sugar and
Yeah,
oil, refined oils and
yeah,
refined salt and refined sugar. So there's not much diversity in the typical North American diet. And that's what we're saying. We need to change that. Like you need to get to the produce section. You need to, you know, look at it as a fun game where you're, you know, turn your head just even 1 degree to the left or to the right, and you might actually see a vegetable there that you've never even eaten before, and just put it in the basket, Google it, figure out how to make a recipe with it, and then, you know, away
correct.
you go, right? It doesn't have to be
Absolutely.
hard.
And then you could go down the tea aisle, like, okay, let's try some of these herbal teas and read the
Yeah.
ingredients. Like, oh my God, there's a bunch of interesting little herbs there and teas. And then, you know, so that's such a pleasant, easy way to add more diversity into your diet.
Amazing. Let's chat about your book, because you have your new book coming
Yes.
out, which is the all new and improved Dr. Terry
Here we
Wahls
go. So I
Gerson.
could get the,
Yeah,
there we go.
hold it right up there, the Wahls Protocol. Amazing. And it's not just for reversing multiple sclerosis, it's for chronic degenerative diseases of all kinds as well.
Yes.
Would you say yes?
Yes.
Okay, good. And so anybody who's listening to this, let's, before we dive into how it's new and improved, let's just go back to help people understand multiple sclerosis and the connection between gut health and our microbiome, because it is an autoimmune disorder, correct?
Yes, yes. So it's a problem in the brain and the spinal cord where the immune cells appear to be attacking the insulation on the wiring that goes around the connections between one brain cell and the next one. And when you have an acute breakdown, that's called a relapse. If you see an MRI, that'll be an acute white lesion. And then over time, there's scarring and the disability becomes fixed and steadily worse, difficulty walking, needing a cane, walker, wheelchair. And there's a lot more appreciation now that cognitive decline is very common. Visual loss is very common. Difficulty with the autonomic nervous system. So that's the part of the nervous system that happens automatically in the background. It regulates blood pressure, heart rate, blood flow vessel, swallowing, digestion. And so the longer you have MS, the more difficult that becomes. And we say, we don't really know. There seems to be maybe some triggering infection. We don't know what bacteria or viruses do that. It interacts with unknown environmental factors. There are maybe 200 to 300 different genes that will increase your risk ever so slightly. So the vast majority of someone who gets that gene does not get the disease. So each gene might increase your risk 0.5%, 1%, maybe 2% at really the most potent genes. And so, and the other thing is that because these damaged spots in my brain and spinal cord are unique to the person, the clinical signs and symptoms for each individual person are unique to them. It's sort of like a fingerprint. So no one's individual course or individual physical findings will be the same.
And have you had an MRI since healing? I'm assuming you've had.
I've had a couple. First time, I'm sort of a scamp. The first time I called my neurologist when things are better, I called up the clinics. There's been a big change. I really ought to be seen. So they wanted to see me that day. I said, well, no, I'll come on Friday. No, we should see you now. I said, no, Friday will be fine. So I come in on Friday. I walk in, and I see the nurse coming out, sort of walking around, looking around, and I think, I bet she's looking for me. So I stand up, go, hey, Cindy, over here. Dr. Wahls, where's your wheelchair? I said, well, actually, and so I just walked in. My neurologist was stunned. He was so excited with how remarkably I had improved. So, okay, let's get your MRI. The MRI showed no change. So he talked with me, said, I guess that was probably naive to think that lesions you've had for 7 years are going to go away. So this doesn't make sense. But Terry, I want to reassure you, you're obviously clinically doing very well. You've rewired your brain. So we can do this, periodically. So I've had a couple more since. I've told my neurologist I'm not interested in having any more since clinically. Yeah. I continue to improve. When I last saw my neurologist, that would have been a couple of weeks ago. It's sort of like, well, what can you do now? So I dropped down, I did 10 push-ups on my toes. I go, okay, that's enough. And I said, okay, how about vertical leaps? So I did 10 vertical leaps. Okay, that's enough. I said, how about staying 1 foot? And so I did that. And I said, I could do it with my eyes closed. No, don't do that. You're good. That's fine.
And so, okay, so this part I think is really critical for people to know is that, I love the book, The Brain That Changes Itself. I don't know if you've read that book.
Yes, that's a lovely book.
Yeah, a really wonderful book for people to understand how, our brain, is really underutilized for the most part. And it's so brilliant because it can rewire around damaged, scar tissued areas.
It will, and it wants to. You just have to do it. You have to practice. You have to work at it. Now, fortunately, I was an athlete before becoming a physician, and so I was very comfortable with working, training, and even though my uh, neurologist was not sending me to physical therapy, I just sent myself. Like, okay, so I kept going to see a physical therapist, and I'd gotten a physical therapist who worked with athletes, and convinced him to work with me, and we started doing e-stim, and I was sort of not a lot was happening, but then when I changed my diet, I started getting stronger. Then it was dramatic, but I worked at it. I worked
Right.
incredibly hard at it, um, very much like an athlete, very much like someone who's in intensive rehab. But the results were amazing. The results are amazing, and I still work at it. I still have, I do about 2.5 hours every day of self-care between my meditations, my physical training, and then my sauna is my treat at the end.
Wow.
And then I start my work day.
Right. And then, so you do 2.5 hours before you start your workday.
Yes.
So you are really prioritizing your why, that you want to be there for your kids. So you are prioritizing your health so that you can be there, and nothing comes before that. I mean, I love that, which is huge.
It took a long while to do that, and what probably helped me out a lot, as I was having a bigger and bigger impact traveling the world. I couldn't take that many speaking gigs because I was working full time, and I finally get to the point like, okay, if I really want to create this epidemic of health, I have to create more time in my schedule so I could be willing to do more speaking gigs. And so I made the decision to leave the VA, which I loved. I mean, there was a lot that I really liked about the VA. Continue my research at the U because I think it's so important to have research uh, of the Wahls Protocol. And that freed up time to travel around the world. And then when I made that decision, I'm like, and I'm going to, get my workouts in every day. And then I decided, like, okay, 9, I can start my day at 9. And so, and what I discovered was like, well, one, I kept getting stronger. Two, I'm far more effective at work when
Totally.
I do all that self-care. It's like, wow, that's really interesting.
And it
And
takes
of
us a
course,
long time to learn that, right? Like
it
to,
takes us a very long time.
yeah.
I think um, it, an interesting idea is that if you get up at 4 a.m. to do your workouts, because you should do your workout, but you don't go to bed early enough so you're getting enough sleep, it's like you're stepping over $1,000 bills to pick up pennies
Right. Yeah, that's a
with that
very
extra
good saying.
workout.
Yeah, it's critical because the sleep is so important, right? It's when our brain actually, it's the one organ that doesn't detoxify during the day, but it actually can regenerate and heal and cleanse itself at nighttime when we are sleeping. So it's so critical to have that sleep. And so some
So,
people, yeah.
correct.
So we do have to prioritize, and it might mean letting go of the things that are not serving you at all, that are not contributing to your health. So, it could be, a lot of people are wasting time hanging out with people they don't even like very much, but they do it because they want to be social. And maybe it's, choosing your friends more
It is
intimately.
absolutely, can be a huge challenge to figure that out, and uh, probably making incremental commitments to doing a better job of self-care. And fortunately for me, I have the trigeminal neuralgia, so the consequence of inadequate self-care and my neuralgia train on are so painful that I can't walk, I can't talk, I can't function, that I'm like, okay, I have to do a better job of self-care because this, I just had another round of face pain. And so I'm sitting down with my wife saying like, okay, what do you think the trigger was? And what do you think, where's my opportunity for improvement? And so over time, I came to prioritize the self-care. Like, okay, that's under my control. I can do that. Getting into bed, between 9 and 9:30, I can control that.
Exactly.
Reading for a little bit and turning off the light, I can control that. And that, now I'm happy enough that I don't have to set my alarm. I just wake up, occasionally after Jack, but usually before I wake up and start my self-care routine, and off I go.
Yeah, and it is a learning process. So for when people are listening to this and they're thinking, oh my gosh, I have to change my diet, I have to do physiotherapy, and I need to start meditating. And especially if, people have not done any of those three things. So what does that look like for a typical patient who wants to do the Wahls Protocol?
Yeah. So, the first thing I acknowledge is changing behavior, incredibly hard.
Mhm,
And so we really want you to help understand why you want to do this, because
mhm.
it will be uncomfortable. You'll go through some withdrawal cravings, and for you to be willing to give up today's pleasures for tomorrow's benefit is a big ask. So let's talk about what is your why in life? What do you want your health for? What's your personal mission? And this big clarifying exercise is: there's a house on fire. Is there anything that you care so much about that you would be willing to go into that house to save that person or to save that thing?
Mhm.
And if there's nothing, I'm going to have a very hard time for that person. But if I
Yeah.
can find something that they're like, well, for my kids, my grandchild, okay, now I'm very optimistic that that person will be very successful. And so then we go through some exercises to help them tap into um, their why, and help inspire them as to that healing is possible, mechanisms that they can understand, because I've got a metaphor that fits for their background. And I've done a little timeline to understand their health journey and what interventions will likely have the highest impact. And so we might start with a Mediterranean type diet, or we might start with level 1 of my diet, or I might start with meditation. So we're going to negotiate what's the first um, intervention that we're going to do, and the next actionable step that they could take towards that intervention. Now, in the VA, if they wanted to work with me and my team and be part of our groups, they had to commit to being gluten-free, dairy-free, egg-free, and lots of vegetables. And we had a plan for the vegetarian and vegans, and we had a different plan for the meat eaters. If they were like, that really sounds too hard, I just don't think I can do that, I'm like, okay, then I'm going to have you meet with a dietitian who will work with you to improve the quality of your diet at the pace that you can manage. And when you're ready, come on back.
Right.
Or like, this just sounds too hard, I'm not raising. We understand. It may not be the right time in your life. When it is, talk to your primary care doc or your specialist and have them send you back. I
Right.
don't argue with my patients. They're ready
Yeah.
to make changes, and then we'll facilitate the changes at the pace that they can manage. But if they're not ready, that's fine. I'm not. I have to have a long
The
line
lineup.
waiting to come see me. It's like, that's fine. Come back when you are.
Yeah. And this is the part that took me a long time to get over, is the fact that, why are you not ready? Like, come on, like the pain of your illness has got to be so excruciating that, it has to be more than the pain of making the behavior change. So for me, I was like, I'd be working with the person to be like, trying to figure out their why, trying to figure out their everything. And it was painful for me. And then finally, once I let that go and I realized, you know what, I got to save my energy for the people who are ready. Because
We're
like you
ready.
said, there's a lineup of 233,000 North Americans who have a chronic disease right now. And a good portion of
Absolutely.
them are ready. So, that took me a long time. So for any doctors and, healthcare workers and, coaches out there that are listening to this, I mean, try and avoid what I went through, which was where it was almost like
You know,
the, I
and
don't
we
know.
have to let we have to let it go.
We
It's
do.
it's their journey. They will have to discover this. You can think of your brother or your sister who has a problem with tobacco or alcohol, and is engaging in some addictive behaviors that you wish they wouldn't. But you probably still love them,
Hmm.
and you still want to help them and be supportive. And when they're ready to quit, you can be more effective help. You want to be careful that you're not enabling bad decisions, but not everyone can beat their addiction.
And food is an addiction. People need to understand that. And that's a part that I think is hard because a lot of people, they don't really realize that they are
Well,
privy
you know,
to the ingredients in that processed food, and it is a drug. And especially when they're giving it to their children. I mean, it's a
it's
powerful drug for your
designed as a
children.
drug.
Yeah.
The tobacco industry diversified into the food industry, and they are able to hire food scientists that are very adept at using food-like chemicals to create cravings, dependencies, and increase the addictive nature of the products that are consumed. And the fast food industry is good at this. The manufactured food industry is good at this. And we are absolutely just allowing for the destruction of our economies
Hmm.
and the destruction of our societies because our governments were unable to regulate the food industry. And they're not going to be able to. It's just not going to happen. Um, Fortunately, with people like you
And like you.
and,
Yeah.
and me that are out there teaching the public and the people who are ready to understand that we can do these radical things known as preparing our own food, meditating, walking, moving, that we can create health by our own choices. So,
Mhm.
yes,
Yeah,
we can
that's
do this.
amazing. And as a result of doing this and the people making those changes, we make changes to our soil quality and our agricultural systems and food security. And we change societies because as people are recovering from these mental health or these, sorry, chronic, what looks like a physical chronic condition from like the neck down, they're also healing mentally as well. And when
Yes,
people heal
yes.
mentally, that is when we start making different decisions in our society, and we have more loving relationships. We have people working in the environments that they are inspired to work in, as opposed to not even have the energy to like, you know, think of doing something else or going back to school or changing their careers or, so we see everything shift on an economic, on a social, on an environmental level. And that's the part that really excites me about this work that you're doing and that I'm doing.
Mark Hyman's written a book that's just come out to Food Fix that explores the relationship between food policy, health, economic policy. I'm very, very impressed with that book. And I've been looking globally at the rise of a much more conservative, sort of right-wing efforts, political points of view, more irritability, rage in a lot of our political system.
Mm.
I'm thinking about food quality, microglia activation, impulse control issues,
Yeah.
again tied to food quality. And so, if it makes me wonder if some of the shift in the rise in this rage and anger in the political system that I think is leading towards more right-wing governments is tied into the deterioration of the food quality and tied into increased microglia activation, loss of impulse control. And so, hopefully, as our society is also learning more about self-care and the role of food behaviors, that we'll see better communication in our political system, because in order to solve these big crises that we have, all of us internationally,
Yeah.
we need political leaders that can talk to one another, listen to one another, and come to reasoned solutions that don't involve a lot of rage.
I love that. And I know for people who are listening, they're like, what? How did you just tie in, diet to our political system? But it's I've seen it hundreds and hundreds of times with my clients that have healed, and especially among the men. They're the ones who actually recognize it even more, that they come to me after, when they're healed from their diabetes and their heart disease and whatever other inflammatory conditions are happening in their body. And the number one thing they say to me is, wow, if I had, done this 20 years ago, I would never have gone off to war, because they don't have that rage. They don't have that anger flare up anymore. They don't feel on edge and anxious. And not only that, but by developing a relationship to food, they also develop a relationship to their local farmer. They develop a relationship to the land, to nature. And then all of a sudden that shifts their perspective. And they're like, and one in particular, he had wanted to take his life. He was in the British Air Forces. He had, all of these mental health and physical health conditions. And he came back afterwards, and we actually did a podcast where he said, he was like, we are all one. And he said, we are all connected. And he wouldn't have been able to realize that if he hadn't healed using food as medicine. And that floored me that, he had that epiphany.
I mean, I think it is a driver into why there is so much rage in the world. And I see rage going on here on the U.S. side. On the left, there's a lot of rage and anger, and there's a lot of rage and anger on the right. And I look at Europe and South America. There's so much more of that. And we know nationally in the US and in Europe, I don't know in South America, but I'm guessing it's true that the quality of the diet has continued to deteriorate, that there's fewer vegetables, that there's more sugar processed food, more fast food. And so, of course, this is only a theory, but I certainly speculate that the two are interconnected.
No, I hands down feel the same way. And I mean, right now, because I'm in the middle of my PhD and I'm in a social sciences PhD, this is exactly the type of topic that, I can research.
Yes.
And yeah, no, it's for anybody, any other students out there who are looking for a dissertation topic, this is a good one
Yeah,
to take
absolutely.
on 100%. And there's enough scientific evidence to show the mechanisms of action in the brain and in the body when we are depleted of nutrients, that you would find the scientific, the biological explanation of that, in addition to being able to then extrapolate into our, political and social systems and draw those conclusions as well. I think it would be an incredible study for someone. So let's, I mean, I can talk to you for sure for the next 6 hours straight. And I'm sure our listeners want to listen to you for the next 6 hours straight.
Yeah.
But I want to know, let's wrap this up by talking about your book and talk
Yes.
about how it is new and improved, where people can find it, what are the changes that have been made, the additions. And I'm sure there's been a few tweaks, I'm sure, since you first wrote the book years ago.
Sure. So it's out on March 17th. So wherever books are sold, you can go to my website, terrywahls.com. We'll have links to online stores there as well. The new stuff. Number one, great information on the behavior change model that we've been discussing, because the struggle is, how do we successfully deal with these food addictions and these behavior addictions, and to get you to be more successful as you go from your current disease-promoting health behaviors to health-promoting behaviors. I think that's very helpful. Then on the diet side, I have a much more robust program for you. It's so that you can personalize this to address your histamine issues, your oxalate, FODMAP issues if you have that. We talk about the elimination diet in more detail, who would benefit from this more restrictive elimination diet, and then how to reintroduce foods back in. Ketosis is much more popular now than it was when I first wrote about it 6 years ago. But I talk about how to enter ketosis, what labs to monitor to know that you're doing it safely, and how you can decide which fats are appropriate for you. A lot of the current ketogenic diets stress eggs and dairy, which I have big problems with. So I talk about why you might want to use medium chain triglycerides or MCT oil, why you might want to use olive oil, and how to decide which would be better for you. And then we talk about the fact that there are many ways to be in ketosis. There's the high-fat diet. There is time-restricted feeding, intermittent fasting, periodic fasts. Talk about metabolic switching and why that may be as effective or perhaps more effective than long-term ketosis. We talk stem cells. What is the role of stem cells for serious systemic autoimmune conditions that are not responding to therapy? What are the current approved indications? What are the research indications? And what could you do to boost stem cells now without spending hundreds of thousands of dollars and risking the induction phase for stem cells? We talk about longevity. Who would not enjoy looking and feeling 5 years younger, 10 years younger, 15 years younger? And we talk about resilience, how to improve your emotional resilience, how to improve your metabolic resilience. And then we talk about, of course, some of the research updates, epigenetics, microbiome, neurorehabilitation. I'll tell you about the research that's been going on in my lab, what we've done thus far, and how after being, called a crackpot, dangerous, and a variety of other unsavory names, that I'm now being heralded as this brilliant visionary and getting these international awards for my work. So it certainly, to me, is an incredibly hopeful book. You'll see my transformation as a patient, as a researcher. You'll see the transformation of our other patients in our clinics and in our followers. And you'll have metaphors that I think will work for you, because I use metaphors for a variety of vocational backgrounds. So hopefully you can find some metaphors in my book that will resonate deeply with you and the various tribes that you serve.
That is an incredible synopsis. And I know from having read your original book when it first came out that it is, you want to devour it because there's just so much good information, and you don't have to have a science background. You don't have to, know any of the terminology. You explained it so well. So I can just imagine that this new and improved version is going to be, I'm going to read it like page, word. It'll be fun. It's going to be incredible. The one piece that you actually just reminded me of that I just want to touch on for people who have heard Dr. Wahls' journey is that, you were an N of one. You were just an anecdotal story 10 years ago, right? And we hear all the time people saying, oh, well, there haven't been any studies done. And we hear people saying, well, that's just an anecdote. And, a lot of physicians will say this. A lot of researchers will disregard any of these N of ones. Whereas it is the N of one, you are that N of one that has now become an N of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions. And this is so important for people to stop and think about this so that never again will you disregard that N of one. It doesn't mean you have to jump in head first into whatever they did, but you should get curious and think, like when I saw I saw your TED Talk and I'm like, hot dang, this woman is onto something. What is it? I don't know, but let's think about it. And it's what opened me up to want to learn more and to then research even more and then to follow even further. And because I stuck by your side and thousands of other people stuck by your side, it's what allowed you to then get the funding for your studies and to do all of that. And now you're no longer that N of one, like you are changing the world.
And this is how medical advances happen. You have someone who's alert enough to say, this is an interesting case, they publish it. Then they publish a case series, which is what I did, case 1, then case series. Then if someone says, well, let's do a little small pilot study, and we manage to secure funding, we get the little small pilot safety study, and like, oh my God, that was pretty good too. Then we get a randomized study, and then another randomized study, and then another randomized study. That is how all advances happen.
Exactly.
It's a lot of work. It's a grind. You need to find someone who's willing to ignore the outside noise and do the grind. And fortunately, I feel this moral obligation to. The other thing that is remarkable is that, and this really got people upset at the university. In addition to doing the grind of doing the research, I'm telling the public what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and my theories. And my scientific colleagues are like, no, you can't do it that way. You'll never get more funding. You'll not be taken serious. People will steal your ideas. And I thought, it'll take, 10, 20 years for my ideas to be accepted, and people will be demented in nursing homes and dead. And they don't need to be. So I'm going to tell them at the same time, and they can decide for themselves how safe or potentially harmful my ideas are. And I will get funding. And what we discovered, and what the university discovered, was as I was having a huge impact on the lives of people who had money, they're calling the university because they go to my website and saw that I had a fund to support my research. They call the university and say, we'd like to make a donation to the Wahls Research Lab. So the third time they had a 6-figure donation come in, I had an appointment in my calendar with the dean of the medical school. I thought, oh, dear God, what did I do now? And it's like, okay, Dr. Wahls, this has never happened. Tell me more about your research.
Right.
And so that's how I got all my first 3 pilot studies going. That was all funded by philanthropy. The next big study was funded by the MS Society. And now the next study that we're doing, again, funded by philanthropy, because I'm doing the most innovative work. And we're writing other studies to analyze the, because I have mountains of data. I have mountains of frozen biologic specimens that we're writing grants for to get analyzed. And so we have some high scores, so we're going to get some very interesting analyses done on a bunch of frozen blood. It'd be great, because then we'll understand the mechanisms of what was it that I changed? What was it biologically that I changed that allowed for all that self-healing to occur? Yeah. Great questions that'll be fun to analyze.
That is so exciting, and so exciting for me, because I know I talk about this, a lot in our podcast, the fact that, I've really struggled to figure out what my dissertation topic for my PhD is going to be on. And I finally have arrived, and I'm very excited because it's really centered around, it has a lot to do with the behavior change needed in those paradigm shifts and worldview shifts that need to happen in order to allow somebody with a chronic disease to want to adopt a lifestyle change. It's exactly. And so one of the ways that we're kicking it off, because everything's intertwined with my business as well, and the PhD research I'm doing, is that I'm getting on my bike and I'm riding and running to California, leaving from Canada, going down to California, and we're going to be speaking and all along the way, and teaching all along the way, and introducing, because I couldn't settle on one chronic illness, because it's not, when you're doing this lifestyle change, it's not treating the disease, it's treating the body. It's building resilience. It's creating health. And so I couldn't choose one topic to study. And everybody kept on saying, well, why don't you just design a pilot clinical trial and do that? And I said, I just can't do that for this. It needs to be that broader discussion that we have to treat the body, not treat the disease. And so by doing this, I'm going to be on this tour and talking about you, and talking about the Shazai team and their research around, reversing Alzheimer's using plant-based whole food as medicine. We're going to be talking, about all of the different type 2 diabetes and the work that the specialists in type 2 diabetes and type 1 diabetes are doing, and the results they're getting by, changing diet and showing that diet has to do with everything. But I love that your story. And again, for anybody out there who's thinking about going to school or doing a master's thesis or doing a PhD, or even just thinking about how science is done, it's important to know that it is done in these. Yours were never baby steps, like yours were massive steps, I'll say, but they were giant steps. But it is done by all of these sequential steps in these orders, and it starts, small and gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it takes time. And as I'm saying this to tell other people that, I'm just reassuring myself that, okay, Nikki, it just takes time,
It
which
takes
is
time.
very helpful. And it takes time in the healing. But what I love about the work that you do and the work I do is you see the results pretty quickly, don't you? Like
You
you're
know,
not waiting years for them.
correct. So, improving mood, improving mental clarity, improving energy, that people often can tell things are going in the right direction in a month's time, and very clearly in 3 months' time. Being able to ride a bike again, being able to have better motor function, that's going to take longer, more work, and it can be done. But yes,
But even then, we're still talking, months. We're not talking about countless years,
correct.
right? And so
You
if
know,
you think about how long you're going to live with that illness, if you don't do anything versus putting the time in now to get those long-term
if
rewards.
you were in a major accident and had multiple long bones fractured, you had to go through rehab, uh, or had a stroke, had to go through rehab. People understand that we'd go to a rehab center and you'd be working with a bunch of physical therapists, probably 6 to 8 hours a day. You'd be working your ass off, way harder than athletes.
Yeah.
But but because you would do all of that work, reteaching your brain and your muscles how to work, you get so much function back. We can help our people with chronic disease get their function back by creating health, getting the cellular milieu addressed, and then helping them bit by bit to begin retraining their muscles, their brain connection to their muscles, and doing the work. And we see marvelous results.
That
You
is
have to work
incredible.
at it. But
You
yes,
have to
if you
work at
work
it.
at it, you
So
can see marvelous results.
So to wrap it up, let's talk about the one biggest piece that everybody comes to me with, and that is money. Okay.
Yes.
So, if you don't have any money, if you are, you're still technically getting food from somewhere because you're eating a couple times a day. But if you don't have any money, can you still do this program? How can you succeed on this
So,
program?
the wonder is that I worked in the VA. I was the Veteran Affairs Hospital here in the U.S. And the clinic that I ran was the Therapeutic Lifestyle Clinic. Most of my patients were living on food stamps. They were disabled. They had very fixed incomes. And in the VA, I could not do any fancy functional medicine testing. The first couple of years, I was in the traumatic brain injury clinic, and I had no lab testing. I just got 20 minutes twice a year. I got people inspired to begin cooking at home, adopting the Wahls diet. And again, as I mentioned, I had either the meat eating or the vegetarian vegan version for that. And then in the therapeutic lifestyle clinic, we saw people with complex medical problems. Again, no money, living on food stamps. We'd have cooking classes, meditation classes, movement classes, and teach them how to shop, how to make menus, how to follow a recipe, how to work without a recipe. And yeah, people lived in rural Iowa, shopping in their local grocery stores. And they started out eating conventional food, canned food, frozen food, conventional meat. And we talk about improving the quality of your food according to what you can afford. And these folks would begin gardening. They'd begin growing foods in pots. They would have their friends who were hunters drop off meat. They began going to the farmers markets. So going to the farmers at the market and say, like, at the end of the market, when everything's done, what's the best price you'll give me to take everything you got left? And so my vets were teaching me that you could live on food stamps and implement the protocol and get amazing results. You could get amazing results eating conventional foods. It helped a lot to have support groups. It helped a lot to have peer-to-peer interactions, to have sort of mentors and sponsors. And but the key thing is you're going to have to learn how to cook at home. And so finding someone who can help you with that. We certainly had a lot of meals and courses that we taught that were actually vegetarian and vegan, even for the meat eaters, to make it more affordable for them as well.
Mm-hmm.
So if anyone tries to tell me that they can't do it because they can't do functional medicine testing, my response is, I did it in the VA for 4 years with 0 functional medicine testing. They tell me they can't afford it because they can't go to Whole Foods. And I tell them, and I did it in the VA with patients living on food stamps in rural Iowa, going to rural grocery stores. So yes, you can certainly do that. They said they don't know how to cook. I said, well, come to some cooking classes, and we show people do food demos, cooking demos. We have them help cook, talk about instant pots, pressure cookers, and slow cookers. And so we've had tremendous success. Food, money is not a barrier.
I love that. That is an incredible way to wrap up the show, because I don't think we've left any rocks unturned in this podcast. Really, I think for anybody who's listening, there's not a lot to stop you from doing this, but the first thing you need to do is understand your why, and then you can get going. First things first, get Dr. Terry Wahls' book, because that is going to describe, show that book one more time. Awesome. It's a beautiful cover, by the way. I love it.
Thank you. We're very pleased with it too.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. And get that book. Also buy it as a gift for your loved ones as well. A lot of times, we're afraid when somebody comes to us and they just tell us that they've been diagnosed with something like MS or type 2 diabetes. And, we feel terrible and we don't know what to say and we don't know what to do, or we want to jump in and tell them what to do. I mean, just keep it super simple. You don't even have to say anything. Order the book for them, let it arrive at their house, and then just tell them, hey, I love you. I care about you. I listened to this great podcast with Dr. Terry Wahls, whether it was on the Rich World podcast or whether it was our podcast or whoever's podcast, and, and just start giving them information in a non-pushy way and let them take in the information and make the decision for themselves. Show up at their house, cook them one of the Wahls Protocol meals. That's another good way to introduce them so they don't think that they're going to be eating like, scary fried octopus tentacles or, anything like that. Show them that it's just really real easy food that you can acquire from most grocery stores and you can make it yourself. And then, allow people to have the information, and don't be afraid to share it, for sure. Thank you, Dr. Wahls. It has been such a pleasure again. You are a light in this world, and I'm so excited to follow you for the next 10 years and see the magic you're going to be creating in the lab, in your patients, with your patients and with the general public as well.
Thank you.
But before we wrap up, tell me about your health practitioner training program, because I know that you offer that as well.
Yeah, so we train physicians, health coaches, nutrition professionals, and other health professionals on how to implement the Wahls Protocol. We also give them really detailed insight into the Wahls behavior change model, which I'd mentioned earlier is just so important to help your patients be much more successful at adopting and sustaining behavior change. In addition to that, we have the Wahls Protocol Seminar, which is a program we have hundreds of people come to every year, again, teaching them the principles of diet and lifestyle behavior change to get control of their health, improve their health, reduce the symptoms of their disease. We laugh, we sing, we dance. It's really a wonderful, wonderful time.
Amazing. Awesome. We'll put those links in the show notes as well. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Dr. Terry Wahls. Isn't she inspirational? And she's an incredible wealth of knowledge. And she's a mom who was able to reverse her chronic disease amidst a crazy busy lifestyle, amidst having to take care of kids, amidst, all the things that she sees on a day-to-day basis as a researcher and a physician. So if you're thinking you don't have the time or the money to do this, think again, because what have you got to lose? You have years to lose with your loved ones. You have years to lose achieving your dreams in this gorgeous world that does come with a finite, it is a finite lifespan, but we can lengthen that lifespan, whether it's to 95 years, 100 years, people can live to 107. Don't you want to have those years of your life where you're living well, as opposed to living with a chronic illness? So no more excuses. Get Dr. Terry Wahls' book, get our book, Eat Real to Heal, and learn about using food as medicine so you can turn your life around and turn the health around for your family as well. Okay, everyone, bye for now. Thanks for being with us. Stay tuned for the next show.